Sure. Speak up.
Yeah, public policy-wise in the state of Alabama, global warming is not even being considered by the state of Alabama or just in general. And we are the home of several skeptics, especially at the University of Alabama, Huntsville. What do you say to our public policy folks, our legislators, our governor? You know, they don't believe it's real. I mean, I know this, but talk to them.
So my question is, what is it they do not believe is real? I showed you the evidence. I mean, these are facts. Carbon dioxide has increased 35%. John Christie or any of these people do not dispute that. The changes in composition of the atmosphere are clear. They're greenhouse gases. That also is not disputed. The temperatures are going up. They may dispute the predictions into the future or say that it's good for us in some fashion. But a lot of the things that we're doing, not only changing the climate, but burning fossil fuels, look at, a barrel of oil has gone up to $100 because the Chinese are competing for it. Those practices are not sustainable. And the question is, should you do anything even prudent about it? In the state of Colorado, we passed Proposition 37 back 2.5 years ago, something like that, which said that the state utilities had to generate 10% of their electricity by using renewables. They've already met that goal. And what they did is provide some incentives in place, one of which you saw that I took advantage of and put solar panels on the roof of my house. And this is a part of the legislation that is being proposed in the Congress as a whole. Seems to me like Alabama should have tons of sunshine and would be an obvious thing to do to cut down on the otherwise take advantage of the sun that's already there and cut down on emissions, and that it would be a prudent thing to do because it reduces our dependence on foreign oil, as well as having benefits of reducing the rate at which the climate may change in the future, even if you are a skeptic of just how bad this could become. But the best scientific evidence, and let me tell you, the IPCC is a consensus document from ultimately thousands of scientists. There are several hundred scientists that are lead authors, that are key participants in this process. And as a consensus document, it's actually a conservative document. And you can see that from things like the sea ice in the Arctic. Things could be much worse than the IPCC suggests, and there are some people who are suggesting that kind of thing. Jim Hansen is a strong advocate that things could be much worse in terms of the melting of Greenland and the collapse of the Greenland ice sheet, and sea level therefore being much higher, much faster than any of the rates that are projected by IPCC. You should realize that IPCC projections are actually conservative in that regard. And these are based upon facts and science. What you do about it is where the debate should occur. And what Congress should be doing about it, in my view, is where the debate should occur. And one thing you can do is, of course, do nothing, which is the default at the moment. And then you suffer the consequences, if there are any consequences. But wouldn't it be prudent, given based upon the trends that we've got, and the fact that what we think has happened, especially in the southeast, is that the warming that we've seen up till now has not been fully realized because it's gotten so much wetter and cloudier, and the potential for warming in the southeast is much greater than just about anywhere else in the world. And look at this year and the drought and the consequences of things like that, and perpetuate that for a number of years. What are the consequences of things like that? And should you do any kind of prudent planning to take that sort of thing into account? Yeah?
Your simulation explained the decrease in European temperatures past and then that little increase?
The decrease, well, in the Northern Hemisphere, after about 1940, after World War II, there was a tremendous amount of new industrialization and a lot of... Yes?
Data you showed a decrease.
Yes. And so there was a lot of pollution that went into the atmosphere. Pollution blocks the sun and actually causes a cooling in the short term. But in the 1950s, in the late 1950s, Clean Air Acts came in because of the consequences for air pollution and, the smogs that they had in London and the tremendous smogs and air pollution-related deaths that they had in places like Pittsburgh, especially, and so on. And so cleaning up the air in the 1950s has helped to remove some of those cooling effects of pollution. So the pollution is having effects if you go to China, during the day you can't see the sun because of all of the pollution. So there's a trade-off here between the short-term pollution versus the longer-term greenhouse gases. The pollution only lasts as long as you have to keep putting pollution into the atmosphere for it to be there. And as soon as you stop, it goes away on the time scale of a week. But all of the carbon dioxide that you've put in there doesn't go away. It stays there, and you've got to live with it for another century or more. It has longer-term consequences. And so the carbon dioxide wins out in the longer run. The effects are relatively modest and from year to year, and it's only after about 1970 that we're really seeing those effects, is our best estimate. That's where it's gotten large enough to exceed the level of natural variability. But up until that time, some of this cooling, which was mainly in the northern hemisphere and especially in northern Europe, some of it was probably related to changes in ocean currents, but pollution probably played a role in that cooling that you're referring to. So there's somebody at the back over there, right up the back.
Yeah, either scientifically or personal reflection. Could you explain the very concept or as an ideal of equilibrium climate? Is it merely an anthropocentric overlay onto an indifferent object?
Well, the climate is never actually in equilibrium. Climate change is occurring all of the time. And I showed you that when I showed you, the last 450,000 years or something like that, there are all these glaciers and interglacials that occur over time, and they're due to relatively small effects as the Earth orbit and the Earth's tilt changes as it goes around the sun. And there's some natural variability that's built into that associated with changes in ocean currents. And so these things happen, but they happen on 10,000-year time frames. And so there is natural evolution and adaptation to these kinds of processes. What is happening now is that the change is occurring on 100-year time frames that would normally take place over 10,000-year time frames. It's happening 100 times faster. And so we can't adapt to it so readily. The problem here is not that climate change is necessarily bad. The problem is the change part, the fact that it's changing to something different, and it's going to keep changing. And so it makes it more difficult for anybody who's got anything related to, a fauna or anything related to what's going on in the environment, any kind of ecosystem, growing trees or something. A species which is now completely adapted to its current climate very quickly may no longer be viable in the future. Another species presumably eventually will come in and take its place, but that takes time. And so it's actually, I think, the change itself, which is and the rate of change, which is the worrying thing, much less the change per se. I mean, after all, as humans, you can get on a plane, you can go to Michigan or somewhere, you can change your climate, and you can adapt to that. You can put an extra sweater on or a coat or something. Or vice versa, but the plants and the vegetation and the animals cannot do that kind of thing. And so things that are viable now may no longer be viable after the change gets beyond a certain point. And even in places like Russia where they say, or Canada, global warming, doesn't that sound good? It turns out, there's a tremendous amount of infrastructure in Russia that's built upon permafrost and frozen ground, including many of their pipelines and natural gas and oil pipelines. And as that ground melts, these break and it has major consequences.